broadly we were both fans of it.
I'd rather get you, because you took notes, but
Yeah.
I was attending the event, so it's more mental in my head.
Okay.
So maybe if we, like, you cover a point, I give my input, and then we go back and forth.
Okay.
It'd be good to cover what you're saying.
What I got from it was, if I shoot through, there's quite a lot here, and then you'll get a sense of the menu of things I thought they talked about. There were discussions on epistemology, which you and I were talking about before. And what I'd like to come back to. And there was a feeling that Peterson was more of a pragmatist, and you guys are more into correspondence theory, and Mohammed Hijab's more into correspondence theory. And I remember when you and I spoke, you said to me, so you agree with correspondence theory, and I queried that, and then we lost that thread and didn't continue. We could come back to that at some point.
What would be good, Tony, is you cover, say, epistemology, we go back and forth, whether we agree or disagree, then we go to the next topic.
Yeah, well, let me give you the others just so you know. Then there was how much the second, so the first one was epistemology. The second one was how important the objective truth of something in a religious book is relative to its mythological impact. So Peterson took Cain and Abel, and he went, yeah, it may have happened as a physical event, but what may be even more interesting, and I agree with him, is that it's a psychological archetype for the human condition. It's a perennial story of the human psyche. Yeah? So how much is it important whether something objectively actually happens, whereas how relative to its mythological value and merit, yeah?
I like that.
Okay, so that's another point of contention, where I'm an extreme liberal. Yeah, I think it's all about the mythology in the story, and I don't even particularly care about the objective stuff so much. What else came up? Concurs that, right, then I got confused, I don't know what you thought, with their view of postmodernism. They seemed to come to a point where they agreed that postmodernism meant querying how you know anything in the first place. Like the question was asked, how do we know God exists? Peterson went, well, it depends what you mean by the key words like know, you, God, yeah? And he and Mohammed Hijab seemed to concur that this was sort of a postmodern trend towards deconstructing words. And here I fell apart with both of them, because to me that's healthy skepticism, not postmodernism.
Yeah, so let's discuss that, because I have some thoughts on that.
Okay, do you want to hear the others as well or not? We can remember them and come back.
So how many is it? A, B?
Epistemology, the truth of objectivity versus mythology, definitions of postmodernism, the elephant in the room we don't need to go to, what the hell, consensus version of truth, that's a deep one, forget it for
Let's
now.
start.
Okay, you want to go? Okay.
We've got about 2 hours. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so where would you like to go on any of them?
You could stand there. Sorry, what's your name? Christian. Christian. Good to meet you. Sabur.
Yeah. And the last thing was...
Stand a bit closer, because, or we can get you to wear a mic.
Oh yeah, I've got the sure.
You got a mic. Sorry, hi Chris.
I haven't got a mic. It's fine. We'll be picked up.
Well, I can give you a, if you want.
We're good.
Are we good? Okay, I'll stand like this and we'll kind of... The last of the four things, so we've got three. The fourth thing, the thing that I personally loved, was near the end Peterson gave a narrative view of Christianity as telling the ultimate tragedy of the human condition. And I think there he's bang on board. Yeah, he said it's the most frightening thing you can look at is told in the story of Christ. And I really loved that Mohammed Hijab seemed to respond to that and see merit in it, yeah? Because to me that cuts to the heart of why Christianity has such power and should be taken seriously. It's not deconstructing the Trinity and all this stuff, it's seeing what Peterson's revealing in that insight, and I love that Mohammed Hijab responded to that positively. So as a meeting of minds on common themes, it was all great, and I was more than happy.
And it would be nice if you start off with why you enjoyed this rather than the second one.
You mean rather than the first one?
Second one rather than the first one.
Well, I'm trying not to be negative if I don't have to be. In truth, should I be really, really truthful? I'll be really, really truthful. I actually thought that maybe the Peterson Mohammed Hijab thing was never going to happen. Part of me suspected it might be a hype, okay? And I like Mohammed Hijab, I'll say that now. Having spoken with him privately off camera, I actually think he's a very nice guy, okay? But I suspected it might have been hype, so I was really surprised when it happened.
Yeah.
Okay, to be honest. Okay. When it did happen, I was really excited for it, and then I found there was no chemistry at all. I didn't think that anything particularly contentious was touched on. I thought Peterson wasn't digging in the way he normally does. He was just listening, which he's an advocate of. He says, I want to listen. And I thought it was very brave of Mohammed Hijab to do the singing and all of this stuff. But essentially, that I didn't think there was much philosophical meat in it. This one, I think there was a lot of philosophical meat, and there was chemistry, and it was all good, and that was the difference for me. What do you think?
Yeah, fantastic. Let's should we begin?
I thought we had.
Oh, I thought we had. Okay, because the way
Okay, forget it.
the way we wanted to start it
Yeah.
was it may be better to categorize the points and say we're going to cover A, B, C, D. We're going to cover epistemology, correspondence theory, something about Christ.
The Christ thing, we had the
Jump in with the first then.
objective truth versus mythological truth, where is more value? And definitions of postmodernism that you and I seem to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hold it.
I could have pitched my
I
pen.
remember the deconstruction element, and then them having a little issue over the meanings of words at the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure it doesn't drop. I'll hold it in my hand.
I'm always one to just defer to dictionary.
Really. So listen, dude, if you want to sort of steer the conversation, I've given you what's on my brain, but I'm quite tired, frazzled. I'm doing stuff today. I've got legal stuff, so I might not be as fluent.
That's all right.
So I can trust you to.
No, that's fine. That's
Sweet.
fine. That's fine. Okay, so let's start off with the first point, which was the chemistry of this one is
Yeah.
better than the last one.
Yeah.
Do you think that's due to the first one being perhaps an ice-breaking session?
Yeah.
And the second one is like, okay, they understood each other and they
Yeah.
had mutual respect.
Yeah, yeah. And again, as I've said, I like Mohammed Hijab, having spoken to him off camera. I find him a very different person off camera potentially to the way he may come on camera. And I thought after the first one, there may have been quite a lot of negatives about Mohammed Hijab's fed into Peterson's ear, based on other things that had happened, which you're probably aware of.
Yeah, in the room.
Right. So I was really quite surprised to see Jordan Peterson re-engage, because Mohammed Hijab had one with his daughter, and that was highly fractious, yeah? So I thought a lot of stuff would have fed back, and
I'm sure he saw that.
Huh?
I'm sure he saw that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he saw that. I'm sure he had a chat with his daughter. I'm sure a lot of people were saying to him, this guy's very contentious and you may have misread him. So the fact Peterson went back, I commend him for, but the fact that it then went so well and he seemed to actually have a chemistry with Mohammed Hijab and respect the fact that he is quite an, you know, he said, you're not an agreeable guy, you're a disagreeable guy, but Peterson can see some merit in that as well. Now, I'm not saying I'm always flying the flag for when anybody, including Mohammed Hijab, is disagreeable, because I'm not. But the fact that you can appreciate that has its place, I like in Peterson, so that surprised me and that was cool.
Good. So on that point, I think let's just begin off with the mindset that Jordan Peterson went into the discussion. I think the first one, he didn't know who the guy was.
Yeah.
And the second one's, here's somebody who totally comes from a different tradition, totally disagrees on some points in a very strong way, and is being honest.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the problems that people like Peterson have is they don't like someone who has an agenda, who's trying to hide what they're doing. So very clearly, Hijab was saying to him that you should accept Islam.
Yeah.
Hijab was saying to him, this is why Islam is true. Hijab was saying to him, your critique in this particular area is incoherent. And that kind of direct, blunt criticism is refreshing for most people. I think that's why they had a chemistry.
I'm not clear where he was up front saying your critique is intelligible.
No, as in when Hijab asked, do you believe in God? And he said, it depends what you
We mean by the words
by the word
you and do.
Yeah.
Even do he took issue with,
which
yeah?
was a bit, and believe.
And believe and God. And he's totally correct, but what interested me then...
Okay, no,
and,
let me just explain
go on.
why that was incoherent, why Hijab was rebuffing that point. Because when it comes to things like studies about STEM, about science, technology, engineering.
Yeah, sorry.
You know, he would use evidence from that against feminists. So he would say, no, women, they have the choice, but they refuse to go to these particular universities. Here's the data, very clear evidence. But when it comes to these questions, he's being pedantic about what does this term mean, what does that term mean, but he doesn't apply that that same criteria to when he's discussing things with feminists. And that is what Hijab was calling a postmodern, you're going all postmodern, you see. And I like the fact that he challenged him on that.
I do, but I thought they both concurred it was a postmodern thing to do.
However, what Hijab was raising is, why are you doing it in this context?
Okay, I could answer that. I don't have a problem answering that at all, because I think when you're talking about feminist activity in the 21st century, you can measure it objectively. Feminists are objects in an objective world. You can get to core facts, yeah? There are facts to be dug up. When you're talking about God, God is ineffable. The same constraints do not apply. You have to question your own epistemology more, because ultimately, I would argue, your epistemology can't grasp God. God is ineffable. And it's not, God is not the same as a feminist.
No.
They're on a very different plane of...
I see what you're saying, but it doesn't explain the fact that he's being asked a question about his beliefs, which are yes or no, which are quite simple. And instead, he sort of meanders off into, what does this mean, what does that mean? Do you see? That's the problem. If he said, okay, what I mean by belief is X.
Yeah.
What I mean is the tripart,
Trinity?
The Aristotle sort of definition of knowledge, right? So knowledge, true justified belief. He could have said, okay, this is what I mean. According to that, yes or no, I believe in God or I don't believe in God. Instead, he just went off into definitions and then did not address the question. I think that's...
I know why it can look that way, but this cuts to the
and
chase.
He took a lot of flack online from everybody.
I wouldn't support that flack. Sorry, I'm in a camp where I think, as I said, God is ineffable. I think epistemology and knowledge and asking yes/no questions can take you to a certain point. It's a very valuable tool, but there's a pre-intellectual a priori condition of instinct which is essentially mystical and undefinable, and I wouldn't expect to be able to nail reality down at that level. Whereas you seem to think that you can. Conservative religious people seem to think that they can literally, cognitively, almost mathematically and logically dissect the whole metaphysics, and I assume that the metaphysics is built with a mystical strata at the top, and that you can use inference and logic to carry you a certain height up there, but at the very highest echelon you're going to move on faith, which is how it should be, which is why you need faith.
So I don't disagree in some of what you're saying. What you're basically referring to is what philosophers call academic throat clearing.
Is it?
So okay. You're basically clearing the air with what the definitions actually mean.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't negate the duty that you have to address the question that you're being asked, which is very clear.
Yeah.
And the question is...
Do you want a brolly? I have a brolly.
You probably need one. Actually, I'm good for...
I'm good.
I don't really have a problem with it.
I do have a brolly, hang on. Okay, this is frontline debating now.
When we get juicy.
This is in the trenches discussion. Get under the brolly, let's go for it. So, I honestly don't think I'm ducking the question.
I'm not saying you're ducking the question.
Okay.
I'm saying Peterson could have had that academic throat clearing.
Oh shit.
For example,
yeah.
Do you remember that conversation we had over there?
Yeah.
What you did in that conversation, and it's online, it's very clear for anybody to see.
Yeah.
You went through your academic thought clearing, and then you were clear on what your stance is.
Yeah.
Peterson, he didn't do the second part.
By throat clearing, do you mean define your terms?
Go beyond defining your terms. You made it clear that you believe it's pragmatically useful to believe in God, and you were very clear on that.
Actually, I'm not sure I did. Are you inferring that because I seem to be refuting correspondence theory, that therefore I must be accepting pragmatism?
No, when you said that your entire view of God is that you don't see it in black or white terms of whether God exists, but you do believe it's useful to believe in God, it's instrumentally useful.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's the sum of its potential merit. It means at minimum it has pragmatic utility. Yeah. I think it's deeper than that.
No, it is, but what you did is you explained this is your belief.
Yeah.
That you believe it to be useful, and therefore people who actually believe in God are going to have say, better lives, right? Peterson doesn't. He alludes to that, but it's almost like he hides his beliefs. He keeps his cards close to his chest. He's not clear on where he stands. So, for example, is he a Christian? If I was to ask you if he's a Christian, actually, let's ask Christian because he's supposed to be having a conversation with us.
Hi,
would you say that Jordan Peterson is a Christian?
In the sense that I think he sees the fundamental value in the more mythological and transcendental, say, archetypal framing of a lot of those texts, the New Testament, the Old Testament, and so on. I think he sees a value there as a psychologist.
Right.
I don't know whether he believes, for example, in Jesus Christ in person, or that a lot of the Old Testament, the stories from the Old Testament, that they're necessarily true.
Right.
I think he's probably more of a pragmatist than some.
So he can't technically be a Christian.
No, I think you're preempting a definition of being a Christian. You're thinking that you can define the box everyone has to sit in, and if somebody goes, no, I see profound merit in this narrative outside. If you look at it from outside that particular box, you then deny them the right to assert that particular perspective and faith.
I agree, but there are limits, though.
There are limits, but
So I'm saying, look, you can't always say, you can't get 5 Christians and always get them to agree what is the definition of Christianity. What you can do is the negation, which is they don't believe in Ganesh.
Yeah, sure.
So you can do that. So with him, he's not clear in his position. And that's what I think, for example, I was watching this channel, I think Majority Reports, I think Atheist, and they were picking up on that conversation where he's being asked about God, he's not answering, and then many different people, Christians, Muslims, atheists, that's one of the main things shared from the video, that he doesn't answer the question. A lot of people are frustrated at that.
Okay, I disagree. I think he's totally answering the question. It's just he wouldn't concur with the context within which the question is framed. And this was touched on in their discussion about Cain and Abel. You remember? He gave the example of Cain and Abel. Now, you can look at the Cain and Abel story 2 ways. You can look at it from, and they're both valid. You can look at it from the point of view of, historically, did it happen as a point of objective reality? Sorry, you're slightly... Yeah? Or you can, and Peterson said you can look at it that way, but the second way to look at it is it's describing the eternal conflict in the human psyche, yeah? That it's psychologically an eternal verity. It's archetypally true. So if you accept it's got those 2 properties, the archetypal truth of the human condition and the historical objective fact, and then you triage them and go, which do we think is of more spiritual merit in terms of helping me to live my life, yeah? In terms of us addressing the human condition. I think the eternal archetypal aspect of it is more potent and more relevant. So, in other words, if the historical truth turned out to be the case but the archetypal story had no merit, it wouldn't be of much interest. However, if the archetypal story has merit, just because the historical truth doesn't, it doesn't downgrade the merit of the story. So he is focusing totally on the impact of the narrative at an archetypal, Jungian kind of level. And the story he gave of the Christ story, his perspective on Christ as being the ultimate horror story of the human condition, I think cuts to the heart of what a lot of Christians may be unconsciously sensing, even if they're not articulating it that way. The fragility of the human condition, and that you have to confront the worst, yeah? And Christianity does a rather uniquely good job of that. I'm not saying to the exclusion of any other religions, they all touch on this, but Christianity, with the symbol of the cross and the crucifixion, as he pointed out, really does push that in your face and go, stare at the horror of your condition. And I think God's agreeing with me on this point.
I think in like a formal orthodox view in Christianity, the view that so many religious Christians and Muslims take, obviously I'd say that Christians don't believe him to be
you might as well come in. If you're going to, otherwise you're the back of the head.
Yeah, got you.
Okay.
So I can see where there are going to be differing opinions about Peterson's orthodoxy. He's really, this is not the Catholic. But I think it's true. I think there are so many adumbrations and levels and a richness there the archetypal kind of framework that people can all relate to. I think that's where his Christology.
Couldn't we? I mean, if we were to stretch it that far, the way that you explained it, and you're saying that he's fine in doing that, then we could also say that Harry Potter is another archetype.
Yeah.
And that is a true story.
Yeah.
But the problem there is...
No, hang on. We wouldn't say it was a true story.
The dynamics
true from a pragmatic point of view. It's happening now.
Okay, so if you're using truth as opposed to factual, then
I'm using his definition.
Yes.
So what's happening in that school, I mean, I haven't read Harry Potter, I haven't seen the films either, but whatever the name of that school is, I've heard the name of the school. That is happening right now in Speaker's Corner.
Yeah.
You know, between Harry and whatever the other witches or whatever they are. You can tell I haven't read the book. That's happening right now between me and Tony, between me and Christian.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yeah, sure.
And the problem there is that it's stretched so far, you can't actually identify as anything.
You can't, if you're asking the question, what is objectively and historically true, you've got to identify what is your key question. I'm always saying this. Your answer can only be as good as your question. What is your key question? The key question I'm always asking is, how should I live? Okay? That's my first question. Okay? Now, if that's not your first question, we're inevitably going to end up coming up with different answers.
What if I was to say, how do I know what's true?
Well, I would say that if I ask the question, very good. If I would say that if I ask the question, how should I live? Almost instantly it invites the next question, how do I know what's true? Okay? But the question, how do I live, is the motive behind asking that next question.
But it can also be the other way around.
It could be. So great. So in the hierarchy of which of those questions is primary, I think how do I live is more primary, because I think how do I live is an eternal question that every human being who's ever been born or whoever will be born will have to face, and which is precisely why the religions in all cultures have generated answers to that core question. And one of the next questions it then invites inevitably is, what the hell's going on? Yeah?
However, the issue there is, if you start off with your question, pragmatism is the paradigm. My question would be correspondence theory. That would be your paradigm.
I'm not anti-correspondence theory at all. Quite
I'm not saying you are. I'm saying there'll be two different paradigms from which you start if the questions are in that order.
I'm saying that I think you've got to separate your inevitabilities from your options, from your contingencies, yeah? And I think asking the question, how do I live, is an inevitable question for all human beings for all time. You ask it unconsciously. It doesn't have to be articulated.
Same with how do I know what's true?
This is your... Okay, on that one you're right, but that very quickly we do start moving into questions of physics and metaphysics that you don't inevitably have to engage with in order to answer the question, how do I live, yeah? It's an advantage to, no question, but it's not absolutely inevitable. If you're a wise person, you will, but you don't have to. But you are compelled to make choices. I have no choice but to make choices, so I've got to ask primarily, on what basis do I make choices? You're right, then you try and work out, where am I, what are the rules, what's going on? You seem to be framing your stuff within trying to nail down objective reality. And it's a statement of faith almost. If you really think that you...
Don't you think all worldviews start off from some level of faith?
Yeah, I think this is the point. We know from, as we said before, Gödel's incompleteness theory, Hume's fallacy of induction, quantum physics, they all show that there are limits to epistemologically what you can grasp. You shouldn't conclude from that the epistemology has no merit, or it isn't the most powerful tool. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It's just not a universal tool. So once you understand that, you realize, as Peterson does, that there'll come a point when that tool is no longer available to you at the higher echelons of your experience. You're going to have to go with faith. You're going to have to go with intuition, and then you can pragmatically look back and see how it went, which is why he says, I'll look for the shining example in other people, yeah? You're going to have to make a leap of faith, act it out, I'll look at you and see if your leap of faith worked. And if it does, then you may have been heading in the right direction. So at some level
carry on.
No, carry on. Well, at some level you've ground down in pragmatism because there's nowhere honest left to go but that.
The last part I don't agree with, because you would still, for Jordan Peterson to decide by I look at the followers, he still has to have a criteria to decide these followers are flourishing, these are not. And that criteria has nothing to do with the question that he's trying to answer.
Okay, yeah, no, we're in an eternal loop here. Again, he has to have faith.
So that's fine. So
Yeah.
we agree there.
Yeah, I think all we've got to do is structure our arguments where we agree, whether you're an atheist or not, your argument will include statements of faith. Now the
That includes
objective...
values.
Yeah,
Getting
values.
down to where did I exist? It's very shortly into the 2nd century. Did Christ exist? Did this person even exist in human form? Lots of the earliest Christian fathers were having that argument with other Christians, other Gnostics. What's cool about this though is it looks like Sane's Gospels, and reading
Sane's Gospels.
Sane's Gospels, and reading into Scripture, Old Testament Scripture, was where a lot of these guys got their idea from Christ from. Like the Isaiah 53, the suffering hero story, it's called. I think what's important is that you take, say if you're listening to the parables Christ teaches, and you listen to many of the ways he's saying powerful moral stuff, it's just as important today as it was back then. And the parables again they appear to be kind of timeless. They never really, you don't need to change them. We're making movies, we do Hollywood films today, which are based in large part on kind of Christian, on those stories. If you take the patriarchs as well, the Lion King and so on. Star Wars is a good example of stories that are actually based on the kernel of...
Anakin is happening right now.
Yeah,
it gets esoteric and strange, right? But those stories encapsulate stuff and truths that are going to be eternal. I think that's what Peterson is trying to get.
Yeah, I think Peterson understands that, and we had this discussion before, I think truth can exist in fiction. And if you're willing to accept that truth, you disagree on that.
Now remember, I believe in correspondence theory.
So I believe in correspondence theory.
No, but I believe correspondence theory in terms of your beliefs, your values. It's not like, for example, you would use correspondence theory if you want to know what's the best way of bulking up your muscles, right? So you'd look at scientific studies about protein synthesis and all this stuff. But when it comes to religion, you would use a pragmatic view.
No. Then we're misunderstanding each other fundamentally, okay? I think in the hierarchy, pragmatism is below correspondence theory, okay? I know that sounds strange. I think pragmatism is below it. However, because I think correspondence theory is based on epistemology, it means there's limits to how far it can take you. Okay, that's one caveat. The other caveat is, and it's a small print caveat, I was going to put the self-consistency principle above correspondence theory, because I think correspondence theory only looks for self-consistency in the present moment empirically. That's really what it aims for, whereas the self-consistency principle, you can project it into the future. In other words, it's even more powerful than correspondence theory. I'm actually bigging up correspondence theory. So as a practical example,
you say that they're linked?
I think
because being consistent is part of
yeah, they're both linked in Plato's principle of self.
If I get Faisal's
Yeah, come in.
Can you substantiate? No.
Come in.
You see, he has a lot of very interesting things to say, but he just
I know. We've chatted before, and he's really interesting. Okay.
Just come listen.
So I think we're all anchored in Plato's principle of self-consistency. Yeah, that when there's a contradiction between any two situations in a system, then there's a problem, and the problem is either one of perception or the system itself. Yeah. So we agree with that. Therefore, the principle of correspondence theory makes perfect sense, and I agree with correspondence theory. I just think you're undervaluating its power, and that the principle of undervaluing its power, because my understanding of correspondence theory is that it's about saying if in the here and now everything is self-consistent, I can trust that. I think you can go further and predict into the future, and that's beyond correspondence theory. That's self-consistency. You're just going, I have so much faith in self-consistency, I just don't think it's going to play out in the present. I'm confident it'll play out in the future. So on the periodic table, they predicted what elements would appear in the future because they were so confident of self-consistency in the universe. Now that didn't tally with self-consistency for them in the moment, but because they put real jackboots on the self-consistency principle, they went, we'll hedge our bets in the future that this element will appear here, this element will appear here. Ditto with the Higgs boson, and this still happens. So I have huge faith in correspondence theory, but it still has cognitive limitations.
But they all do. Correspondence, coherence, semantic, they all do.
Excellent. And when... Sorry, go on.
Because we laboured this point, should we move on to the other points?
Sure. Which ones?
So you had epistemology, and after that you had something else. There's quite a few points you raised in there, and I thought It'd be good to go.
Hang on a sec. We had the epistemology. We had.
Because in many ways we had a similar conversation before.
It's rained all over. It's rained all over the notes. It's okay. Well, we were covering them. We had the Cain and Abel, the objective reality versus mythological reality, yeah, which we were talking about. We had the epistemology, which hopefully we've understood.
Okay, what about the third one?
The third one was the use of postmodernism. Because they both seem, when at some point in the discussion, Peterson said, what does the phrase, do you believe in God mean, yeah? And then he started deconstructing, it depends what you mean by you, what you mean by God, etc., yeah? And they both seemed to concur that that was a postmodern thing to do. And there I departed from both of them, because to me that's just healthy skepticism.
You were telling me last week about postmodern book you were reading.
Yeah. I think it makes perfect sense, right? Because from my understanding, postmodernism is all about deconstructing.
So it makes perfect sense what they were both saying, that is postmodern.
What I thought Mohammed Hijab was saying, because John Peterson was, I have this Carl Jungian methodological understanding of Christianity, right? They're saying it's metaphorically true, right? But he goes, the church fathers never said it was metaphorically true. It was literally true. Like Muslims nowadays hold literally true to the that we have. So then he's saying by you doing this Carl Jung elixir of Christianity, you're kind of being a postmodernist. Right. But postmodernists, what they do, right? They take these legitimate narratives and then delegitimize and talk about how atheist has biases and this and that. It's all about deconstruction. I think postmodern in itself is incoherent. I think it's ingenuine philosophy, but I think the tools he uses are very amazing.
So just before that, do you agree with him that what they were saying was not postmodernism? He thinks that's skepticism.
I disagree, but I think they were both right. That was postmodernism.
Okay, you think it is postmodern?
How would you define postmodernism and how would he?
I'm realizing I'm not clear how to define it. I go back to Plato's cave. I assume in Plato's cave, Plato is saying, and then I'll go through Descartes and I think therefore I am. So with Plato's cave, it's established you cannot trust your own senses. You cannot trust your own cognition. You're a self-deceiving animal, and that's the framework within which you're going to have to operate. The solution to that is the tool to use to counter that is skepticism, yeah? I don't see why postmodernism is doing anything new. It's bigging itself up as some kind of new thing. But actually, we know we have to question what we mean by the words. It's a very healthy thing to do.
Skepticism, though. You're talking about Socratic skepticism, right? Well, the West is very big on. But postmodernists, like start 96 or something. First was post-structuralists, where they talk about history. When they took history apart, they talk about history. It's all about narratives. Victor writes history, and all stories have these four kind of modes. It's either tragic, or it's this, or it's that. They kind of utilize narratives. And the postmodernists came after the post-structuralists, Michael Foucault. They took it even further, right? So delegitimizing these modern notions like of the prison system, of mental health, and and so they're both different forms of skepticism, right?
That's what they do, but how cogent?
But the point is that when John Peterson says, when you say, do you believe in God? He goes, what do you mean by do? Because do is a very philosophical, metaphysical statement, right? Like the theological statement was, right?
Believe.
Yeah, then you, who's the you? The I, the concept, philosophy again. Believe, God. That is very postmodernist in my opinion. Like, it's deconstructing the sentence and talk about how, he's almost saying the question's not even legitimate, isn't it?
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, when I listened to postmodernist thinkers, I read a lot on postmodernism going back. I think there's a point where postmodernism kind of split from, say, Nietzsche was reasonable, Wittgenstein as well, who had some interesting things to say about language and linguistics and so on. When by the time you get to Foucault and the Frankfurt School and stuff, it just goes a bit nuts. And I think it was more I hear what you're saying.
I'm not endorsing
a political kind of political series of ideas that actually started to, and I think intentionally were there to try and take down the American system, the Western system.
We're actually in agreement, because I'm not legitimizing postmodernism. Like I said, I think it's incoherent in general philosophy, right? Because it brings about some of the conceptual problems. But postmodern is still a reality. Like here in America right now, they're doing around critical race theory, they're doing a gender theory, right? Trying to blur the lines between man and woman, right? It's all postmodernist, post-structuralist, patriarchy, oppressed narrative, right?
In terms of philosophy.
Because postmodern, a lot of it is the oppressor and oppressed kind of narrative.
So this is what Hijab was basically saying to him, that when you've been criticizing postmodernism, you're using it yourself when you cannot answer a question about your theology.
Okay, I disagree. I totally disagree.
I disagree with you, Tony.
Why?
I think it's true. Like,
So you disagree?
He disagrees with
I think it is easy just to use use common parlance to get to where you want to be, you know, and I think it.
Do you want to define your terms? Can we define our terms quickly? What I mean by postmodernism, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe we're using the term differently, yeah? Because you're describing to me in societal terms how postmodernists manifest. I don't care so much about that. I care about defining a core term. To me, a postmodernist is someone who thinks human beings are a blank slate.
Can you remind me again, what was the thing that he
It was within the context
I remember hearing it, I just can't remember.
It's the eternal battle of trying to pin down the objective truth of statements. So when you ask statements like, do you believe God exists? That predicates on an assumption that God can be stuck into an objective logical box, and those of us who believe that God is, when you pray in Islam, you say there is always something higher. I think you say that.
God is the highest.
Yeah, well, there is something above. So I assume that God is beyond, ineffable and beyond my understanding. Transcendent, yeah? And that therefore I don't expect to be able to fit God and various other concepts into a box.
There's a slight nuance here.
Yeah.
So we're not supposed to reflect about God because we cannot grasp God's essence.
Okay.
But we're supposed to reflect upon the creation of God because we can. So we can ontologically affirm that there is a God, there is a creator, there's one worthy of worship. But the actual essence is beyond us.
Yeah.
So when someone is asked,
So this is why I believe when Hijab asked that question, it should have been an easy enough answer. I didn't see that kind of.
that's exactly
It's really
my point.
weird. How come you guys are all so comfortable thinking that you can nail down?
It's easy enough, especially for someone like Peterson, who is an intellectual.
What definition of God is he supposed to be agreeing
So
or
just
disagreeing
before that, I want to know, are you an atheist or a Christian?
I'm religious.
You're religious. So it seems to be
Christian.
like maybe religious people want an answer and
I believe in
Yeah,
a deity. I'm a deist.
Oh, you're a deist.
So
You're blocking your own camera, just so you
I
know.
believe in God, absolutely. I do believe there's creation, there's a consciousness behind creation. I am interested very much in esoteric religion and philosophy, and in Christianity, the way it's manifested in Christianity.
like the
over time.
Gnostics.
Yeah, kind of.
Tony, sorry, just to answer your question, yeah?
That's Tony, that's Christian.
Yeah.
Christian, yeah? Nice to meet you. So, once again, I think Hijab was right here as postmodernist because post-structuralists and postmodernists have the same notion that reality has no intrinsic nature. That's the notion of the work, the principle they go to philosophy of, right? And then they start talking about everyone has these legitimized narratives to bring forth their narrative.
So you're saying that define.
as a will to power.
You're saying that's your definition.
I'm
looking for a definition.
Post-structuralists and postmodernists, both of them. I think what postmodernists is like second phase of post-structuralists. What defines postmodernists, Michael Foucault and this lot, is that they are interrogating modern paradigms.
Yeah.
That's what they do. That's why they're kind of different because postmodernists, all about modern, and it's like the systematic interrogation of these legitimizing narratives and so on and so forth. So when John Peterson is saying, what do you mean by do? What do you mean by you? What do you mean by believe? John Peterson's almost saying this statement is illegitimate and let's interrogate it, right? Which is very postmodernist thing to do nowadays. So I think it is postmodern.
You could say it's on the brink of logical positivism. Because remember the logical positivists, they had this idea that if something's not mathematical or mathematically you can show it or empirically, then it's almost meaningless. He's not doing that, but he's close to that by almost saying like, well, we can't really get down to the nitty-gritty.
Wow.
Like what he said is when we get down to, I don't remember his exact words, but believe and one other word he mentioned, he said, if we think we can define them, we can't, or something like this, he said.
Yeah, and I believe, language has a meaning, it is so useful, and we've harmonized and evolved our language to such a point now where when someone asks, do you believe in God, it's kind of yes or no answer, and you can drill into the weeds with that, right? But yeah, I mean, I think Peterson, kind of stands and he will realize that there's an inherent beauty within man and a kind of godlike, if you get things right, a kind of godlike nature in humanity itself, and the idea of a creation that has order, that has a formal order to it, and that's what he talks about a lot. Again, of course, I think he believes this stuff, and I get where maybe he doesn't believe in the white bearded guy.
I don't think anybody does.
Exactly.
Well, you believe in objective truth. You believe in objective facts, which he would probably dispute.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I think greying the area just because the guy used
Okay,
a
so
logic,
that's a good point.
just because the guy used a logical positivist stance for a minute doesn't
No, he did.
automatically put him in that
I'm not
box.
saying
Yeah?
he used it. I'm saying he got close to it.
Yeah, but he's allowed to. It's a tool that you can use. It's just the logical positivists, they used it to the exclusion of all else. That was the problem. Skepticism is a perfectly good tool. It shouldn't be used to the exclusion of else. You want to use the toolkit.
He didn't answer the question.
I know, because the question may in itself be an invalid question. Because
You're not
no, it's no. I'm not. No, I'm not accepting that label. The way I'm looking at postmodernism is in the context of human nature itself. And for me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll give you my definition. Maybe we need a new word. The world divides into two kinds of people. People who think that human beings are blank slates and people who think that human beings arrive with an a priori nature. Okay? Yeah?
That's philosophy, but I don't think
Okay, fine. Now I'll map postmodernism into that, because postmodernism, it sprawls all over the place and I'm not a fan of it, okay? But my understanding is a postmodern position would be, yeah, you're a blank slate, right? That they would engage, whereas religious people of all faiths and Darwinians, we all believe that humans arrive with an a priori nature. So to cut through the Gordian knot of this constant talking about sociology and stuff that I really don't care about,
Okay, so
I'm using that core definition.
Yes,
Yes?
you made a very interesting point. Which
Thank
is,
you.
interestingly enough, theists and Darwinists believe in
We're on the same camp.
a priori beliefs, and then you have the standard social science model, the blank slate model. So Peterson clearly is using the language of the standard social science model, but the audience that he's pandering to, they believe in a priori.
Yes, so he's allowed to. He's made it very, very clear
there's a
that he
problem
believes
there,
in a priori. No, I don't see a problem. He definitely believes in a priori human nature. He believes.
Wait. You said he definitely believes in that nature.
Yeah, but he's not being asked the question, do you believe in a priori nature? He's being asked, do you believe in
I'm not
God?
challenging you here, but I'm saying,
Okay.
I'm just interested. What made you think he believes that? Because I don't see evidence.
Oh, okay.
to believe
Everything I've ever seen the guy says confirms that perspective.
I think he has an understanding there of say, genetics and genes being important in a person's development, and this is obviously
No. That's in regards to the feminism discussions. We're talking about a priori. Like, for example, we have a priori belief in God.
like slate
Hang on, you
versus-
don't bring God in for the minute. Just on psychology, just the fact
No,
that
of
he's.
course he has that.
If he's got an if he thinks that even.
It's like in relation to like a blank slate kind of theory with humans and stuff. Obviously, he believes in genes to a point, but he also believes environment's very important for humans. Marry those together, you've got basically a template for what a human.
As we all do.
He believes we have a biological inheritance. We have our
Yeah.
cognitive architecture,
Yes.
which makes women act this way, men act that way. But when we speak about a priori beliefs as theists, we're not referring to those things. We're referring to what we call the fitra, which we've spoken about. I'm not sure if Plantinga calls it basic beliefs. So when we refer to a priori in the context of theism, we're not speaking about those biological things, because it's clear he does that. That's what he made his career on.
Sorry, here's where we disagree. I think you are. I think that this is a synthesis which should be happening and isn't happening, the differentiation. You're standing on common ground, and Mohammed Hijab and Peterson both actually agreed on that common ground, that we're all in a camp of people who are not postmodernists, who don't believe in a blank slate. From that, it logically follows we are people who believe there is an objective truth. Yeah? Just because I can't pin it down, just because you go, do you know what God is? I may not know exactly what the nature of any given objective truth is, but because I have an a priori nature, I can nail down there must be objective truth out there, and hopefully objective morality. That's the platform I come from.
So the objective truth out there, it depends upon how you define truth, because the way he defined it is the story of Cain and Abel, according to Peterson, would be objectively true. If you speak to an average Muslim or Christian, when they say we believe in Cain and Abel's story being objectively true, they mean literally there was a Cain, there was an Abel. But when he says objectively true, he means it's happening right now. It's happening throughout history.
Right, this is where we need again to define our terms and see whether we're going to agree in a differentiation between facts and truth. Nietzsche made this distinction. Peterson would make this distinction, and I'm very much with it. There are dead facts which have no values and no meaning, and the minute you add a value to a fact, I would say it becomes a truth. Yeah, it's a personal evaluation. Hence, truth can exist in fiction. Now, the fact that you don't think truth can exist in fiction, I really find surprising. If you never read a work of fiction where a character did something insightful and you saw in that It revealed to you a
Can we
truth
take,
about human nature or
Romeo
your
and Juliet,
nature.
Romeo and Juliet, or Tristan and Isolde, right? The stories are they go around. You know, they're often all over literature.
They prop up in different cultures.
So the idea of Romeo and Juliet then, and the idea of fighting, like two factions fighting just because of history, it's not particularly progressive, and often it can lead to tragedy. You know what I mean? Like that. You see, there's a kind of archetypal truth in that. You know?
No one disagrees with that. I mean, Wittgenstein calls religion useful.
I think you can find that
usefully. I forgot the exact. Basically, from a pragmatic point of view, literally false, but metaphorically true.
Yes, which is strong. Yeah.
So no one disagrees with that point. But when it comes to stories like Cain and Abel, one of the lessons from that story, from a Quranic perspective, is about not just murder and jealousy and these things, but about the hereafter. But from a purely, he's not allowed to use a microphone.
I think you realise the place
Dude, don't.
So do you see, as a Christian as well, or sorry, not Christian, as a deist, do you see that element would be missing if you look at it purely from a metaphoric point of view?
Yeah. The answer is yes, clearly. It would be, but I wouldn't prioritise the objective fact of the thing in the way that you would.
Yeah.
I'm not naive to the idea that you're going, well, if this happened, then that happened, then hopefully an afterlife, and hopefully a whole load of things I'd like to happen.
Yeah.
But
you have to say, faith, the idea of faith. You have like faith in Islam. I mean, the concept of faith, right? The idea that maybe these things are kind of unseen, but they can, if you listen, if you pay attention, you can grasp, you can get hold of a concept of God that can exist in your daily life, you know, and it can make you a very religious person, and you can begin to see scripture like everywhere, and learn how to relate properly to other people, and your life can really flourish from that perspective. You know, it's that, as you said, it's important to see there is a beyondness to lots of these stories. That's the power of the archetype. Is the power of the parallel.
I haven't got the answer to the question. Do you believe that you can get truth in fiction or not?
Yeah,
you do.
I'm going to answer what you're saying in a way.
Okay.
So I think there's a split of inherent and total ontology, right? Whereas the Muslims are saying the Quran and the Prophets actually is literally true, right? It's literally happening, right? I don't care how crazy my sound to you, so the Quran is true. Carl Jung started this idea of synthesizing Christianity with mythology, because Carl Jung was at a time when Christianity was on a decline, scientism was on a rise, right? And I think he tried to find a way to kind of like help Christianity survive, saying that it's metaphorically true, which is what you're saying. You're saying something metaphorically true is just as true as it being literally true, right? You're saying something metaphorically.
Yeah, but your contextual.
And I agree with you. And I think this whole idea of symbols, right? In Cain and Abel, what's symbolic about it? Murder, jealousy.
Yeah.
These things are really true. And John Peterson is happening today right now, because these are themes that are repetitively happening, which are linked to the human nature and so on and so forth. Agreed. I think Muslims would even agree on the metaphorical thing as well. But we're taking an extra step, we're going too for it. We're saying it is literally true, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of Christians nowadays have kind of let one leg go, and they're sticking to the metaphorical.
And there's additional meaning to that literally.
Yeah.
There's a lot of difficulty, in assessing whether a lot of these mythological kind of stories actually did happen in real life. The idea of splitting, parting the Red Sea, of, Moses doing lots of his miracles and so on.
Can I really pitch that we change our language here? Then we have the word truth and the word fact. Because we're using the word true in two contexts, okay?
They're both vacuous words.
Okay, I'm defining truth as that which, that which optimizes hermeneutics in accordance with your picture. I've given a very clear definition to you before of what I mean it does.
But that would be a pragmatic.
Okay, whether it's pragmatic or not, I'm giving a definition. I'm giving
You could say the pragmatic.
No, I'm not. I don't agree with your interpretation that it's a pragmatic framework. I don't think I'm doing. I hope I'm not doing that. It's a teleological framework.
I think we'll have intuitive understanding.
Can we not just agree that they're a fact? No, we don't.
I think we have intuitive understanding about truth. The same one we say love, right? No one will be able to fully define them. It will always be short change. But we have intuitive understanding what we're talking about when we're using the word truth, right? It's like what they call it, the bead on a box, right? So let's not try to define it too much.
No. We have. Okay, I
see what you're saying, but
okay, we can't go anywhere. If it's true, and you've agreed that truth can exist, if it's true, you see the problem. If it's the case that truth can exist in fiction, thank you. If it's a fact that truth can exist in fiction, then it follows that not all truths exist within the world of facts. Do you not see that?
You disregard the word fact, because when you say fact is something that's verifiable independently, right? So that's only referred to literally true.
Fine, I'll give you a definition.
But if something's metaphorically true, it is not a fact. It might be true to you, it might really be true, but I won't be able to verify it.
Can I just give a definition?
He doesn't agree. He doesn't agree that a fact is something which is literally true. He takes the view that facts and truths are two different things, and when something has value, you call it true.
Yeah, I'm saying that there's a fact value axis. Are you aware of this way of looking at stuff? Fact value, right? You have the facts on the x-axis, you have the values on the y-axis. The x-axis is irrefutable. It's definitely factually the case, but it has no teleology, it has no meaning until it's evaluated. What consciousness, God, whatever, brings to the table is an evaluation of dead facts. So, and Nietzsche was totally attuned to this. He says it about coins. He says, facts are like coins which have lost the imprint of their symbol, yeah, and now they're just base metal.
Well, another way of thinking about it is a naturalistic fallacy. Facts don't give you values. These are two different...
Yeah, with Hume. It's Hume's fact value thing, yeah? So when Hume talks about the fact value dichotomy in Hume's guillotine, a lot of people seem to accept that now. I think not. I think that you possibly can. The two are connected intrinsically because they're both cross-referencing the same primary a priori reality. You need facts and you need values. What we're experiencing right now is an interface of those two things.